go. Welcome and thanks everybody for joining us for our webinar discussion about the Veeam 11 release and all the features that we're pretty excited about and think that you might be too. I'm Trista Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault. I'm thrilled to have these Veeam experts with us presenting today. I'm going to kick it off by introducing Will Bassich, our Global Data Vault CEO, for those of you who don't know him. Will won't let me tell you exactly how long ago he co-founded Global Data Vault, but I will tell you that he's practically a historian for the evolution of backup and recovery. He is and continues to encourage his team to be forever focused on the cutting edge of the best solutions, which is why we lean in so completely with Veeam. Will, I know we have a lot of our own customers watching, but for those attendees who are not familiar with Global Data Vault, can you just briefly set the stage for who we are, why we love Veeam, and what's so special about our speakers today? And I'll get the slides teed up while you do that.
Sure, and I apologize for difficulties with my video. Is my audio okay?
We'll come back to it. We can catch it. We can catch it at the end. So, like Trista said, I'm Kelly Culwell, product marketing with Global Data Vault. I've got Jonah May with me here. He's over there. I don't know, depending on which way you are. Jonah is one of our implementation engineers at Global Data Vault. He is Veeam certified engineer, Veeam certified architect, and also a Veeam Vanguard for 2021. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this with Jonah is because he got his VMCA, his architect certification when he was 20. So that, as far as we know, he's the youngest Veeam certified architect in the world, really bright guy, has some insight into Veeam products and roadmaps and futures and everything, runs it in his lab at home, etc. So we wanted to have a conversation with him about version 11 and how it sort of relates to you guys, to the end users, but as well as backup as a service and DR as a service providers. We chose a few of the 200 plus features that we wanted to cover. There's so many of them. Little bit of specialized information about those. So that's what we're going to cover today. And like Trista said, feel free to pop questions over in the chat. So I'm going to cover more of a high level, a little bit of history of Veeam. I'm a former Veeam employee. I worked there for 6 years. Love the product. And Jonah will drop in and do the technical stuff and add the goodness to this. We don't want to deal on high level. We want Jonah to get real deep here. So let's get started. If you've worked with Veeam for long, you know that Veeam has always been about innovation, and they've never really done a roadmap, at least when I was there. They always talked about a history of innovation, sort of a reverse roadmap. And Veeam started as a 2-in-1 replication product, first in the market to do virtual only, first in the market to do software only without agents for virtual environments. And they kind of migrated forward and kept that innovation going to where they could actually power on virtual machines directly from a backup file. That was mind-blowing back then, and other companies made fun of them for it, and now some companies are still trying to do it. But they did this instant virtual machine recovery or instant VM recovery, turned that into, hey, let's utilize your backups for something more than just sitting there and taking up disk. So we started with Sure Backup, Sure Replica, which basically gave you a virtual private lab to test things. Then they went into different types of recovery with application explorers. So from a backup file, you can use these explorers to go in and get application consistent recovery items from any one of these applications. Moving on down the line, we were talking about cloud data management, Azure, some of the other big cloud type support. Well, Global Data Vault is very specialized in what we do, and we only deal with Veeam. And I think will talk a little bit about that. But because we only deal with Veeam, we're very laser focused, and we're able to actually add some value into the features that we bring to the customers. And that's what we want to talk about with version 11 today, and make sure that you guys have some understanding about what it is and how Global Data Vault can help you with it. So first, little maintenance notes here. So some upgrade requirements. The biggest thing that we want to let you know is to please don't, if you're a customer of GDV or any other cloud provider, please don't upgrade your environment before talking to your cloud provider because that can break some stuff. I'm not going to go through every one of the items here. You can read them on the extensive notes about the upgrade and the release notes. But basically, if you have any question, Jonah's the guy to ask. He can answer them all for you. All right, so I did these alphabetically. These aren't necessarily in order of anybody's preference. So backup console enhancements, continuous data protection, or CDP. CDP has been talked about for a long time, and it's been something that's been on the roadmap. It's been something that Veeam has discussed. It's finally here. We're going to talk about that. You've probably heard about the Immutable Linux repository. The instant NAS recovery and instant database recovery are more expanded features around that whole instant virtual machine recovery technology and what they now call the data labs, which is sure backup, sure replica type thing. Pretty cool thing is instant recovery of anything to Hyper-V. Previous versions, we did an instant recovery of anything to VMware. And we'll talk about some of the engine backup enhancements, which basically just means Veeam does things faster. That's what they do. All right, so the backup console enhancements. One of the things that we're all worried about is security. And security of the backup environment is pretty key these days because malware, hackers, etc., are going and looking for the backup repositories that are potentially offsite, or how can they access your backup files to corrupt them and delete them. And Veeam has changed that to in the past you had to have admin privileges to be able to run jobs, etc., and Veeam has changed that. If anybody's used Veeam before, there was always, when I first used it, I sort of had this oh no moment, because when you set up a restore job or recovery job, there's a button that says finish. So you select a few things and there's a button that says finish, you click it, you don't know what's going to happen. Well, all that did was bring up another screen or another window that allowed you to choose what you wanted to restore, but it caused confusion. So they've eliminated that. One of the things, especially for cloud providers, is an orphan backup. Jonah, how is this orphan backup without associated jobs? What does that mean for us or for customers?
So what this means is, if you're familiar with Veeam, I'm sure you know, if you remove a VM from a backup job or even delete the backup job, it doesn't actually delete the backups, it just deletes it from the backup schedule. That data still exists on disk. Previously, that would show under the existing tabs that you have: disk, disk imported, disk encrypted, or cloud. Now there's a new tab that will actually tell you that you have orphaned backups, so you can go to make sure and delete those backups to free up space on your repositories.
Nice, because that could be like a disk space issue too, right?
Correct.
Next slide, please. All right, so continuous data protection. This is huge. Like I said before, Veeam's talked about it for a while. Continuous data protection basically it's basically a right splitter. And I'll let Jonah talk about what that means. But what it does is it whatever environment you have over here that's using CDP, you have it running over here as well. So it really drops those RPOs and RTOs, recovery point and recovery time objectives, down for tier 1 apps. Jonah, how about those VM snapshots? Why is CDP important, and what are some of the limitations, like around file restores and things like that?
Right, so CDP as it is right now is a sort of an extension of replication that allows for a lower RPO, though there are slightly different technologies in there. So for example, replication uses VM snapshots for everything. CDP uses a custom I/O filter, which means that you don't see the normal stun that you would see when taking a backup or replication while you're writing CDP. And CDP, like I said, is designed for lower RPO. So while Veeam best practice is to not run replications more than once every hour, their best practice with CDP is every 15 seconds.
Nice.
Though with that limitation is because it's a separate VM and how it's designed, you cannot do file level restores. It's essentially a full failover to the CDP VM if you have to power it on.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about what a write splitter is and how it works?
The write splitter.
The I/O filter that Veeam uses.
Oh, the I/O filter. So the I/O filter is sort of like your changed block tracking driver for Veeam agents, but it gets a little more granular in that instead of copying the whole block, it just copies the changed file.
Nice. So that reduces even, because for anybody who doesn't know, change block tracking is only the blocks that have changed. So this sounds like it does even better than that. And only the I/O changes instead of the whole storage block is what gets sent over, right?
Correct.
Cool. So again, it sounds like this is, version 1. Are there any, do you hear any in the Veeam Vanguard world? Anything about expanding this or making this better? Obviously, we know Veeam's going to do it, but is there anything that you can share with us on that?
There have definitely been requests to extend this to Hyper-V, of course, to allow for functionality into the cloud for it, such as AWS or Azure. And of course, Cloud Connect is on the roadmap, is my understanding. But because this is version 1, it's kind of like when replication first came out, there is no Cloud Connect support yet.
Right. And today it's, like you said, it's not Hyper-V, it's VMware vCenter to vCenter, but we don't have any hardware requirements. There's no likes, and this is built in. As long as you have a universal license, or if you're still using the socket-based with Veeam, it needs to be the Enterprise Plus. But you don't have to pay anything else to get CDP, right?
Correct.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
In fact, if you were upgrading your environment, you could take your current production vCenter and use that as a secondary vCenter for CDP.
Nice. So you get extra use out of the hardware that you already have.
Exactly.
All right. The other thing that we've heard a lot about is this immutable or hardened Linux repository. Right, we're still talking about the security of backups and things like that, which goes along with the admin console. Jonah, how does this work for customers or for us? And can you talk about like the backup copy job process or setting up this Linux repository for customers?
So this hardened Linux repository is more designed for on-premises than it is Cloud Connect, but it essentially takes some of the immutability features that you see in AWS, S3, Azure, and it extends it so you can run it locally on a Linux machine. I believe Veeam best practice is to even not issue a root user, but just a single-use token. That way, a bad actor couldn't get in and basically delete the immutability on the machine. Of course, because the files are immutable, you can't use your forever forward incrementals, though, on the chains. They have to be forward incrementals with periodic fulls.
Okay, so it sounds like something that you'd want to talk to, maybe you or, Veeam expert to set up to make sure that your jobs are configured properly for it. And immutability is just means that you can't touch the file. You can't make changes to it. You can still read from it, but nothing else can happen. Is that right? Is that a fair
Right.
statement?
You set a timer on it, and it's read-only for that amount of time. It can't be deleted. It can't be modified.
Cool. One thing that's interesting to note about this, if you've been with GDV or heard us for long, you know that we developed something called enhanced data protection, and basically what that does, it's based off of Veeam's insider protection, which came out a couple of versions ago. And what insider protection does is it gives you a step between end users and your backup files so that somebody can't come in, or malware, or even an upset employee or something like that, or an accidental deletion can't come in and delete everything. So if something happens to it, insider protection keeps that available in a recycle bin, basically. What that recycle bin does, though, is adds the storage requirements that ultimately somebody has to pay for, right? So what Global Data Vault did was developed enhanced data protection that doesn't use the recycle bin in the same way, but keeps a backup chain for the customers. Jonah, how does that work, or can you tell us a little bit of the secret sauce that GDV uses for that without opening the code, so to speak?
So that enhanced data protection essentially uses the same REFS functionality and APIs that Veeam uses for their spaceless merges and the spaceless GFS retention. But it takes it a step further than insider protection, because since it sits outside of the recycle bin in the customer repository, it's invisible as far as Veeam is concerned, which means if a bad actor did get in, they did delete all of your data, they wouldn't know that that data exists. And we could essentially just move that data back into your repository to give you access back to it.
Nice. So the only people that have access to that is like you guys, the support and the engineers and whatnot. So if the customer or the end user or whomever loses those files, they just call and say, "Hey, I need enhanced data protection recovery," or my stuff's gone. What can you do?
Correct.
Simple, right?
Right.
Nice. And this, just FYI, this is available to everybody. New customers, if you're an existing customer, been with us for a while, just talk to us about it. We'll make sure that it's on your program, because believe me, everybody needs this. All right, we're getting into some of the instant recovery type things, which I personally still get goosebumps about. Some of the abilities to just take things and turn them on and play with them or recover stuff. It's huge, right? So in version 11, we get instant NAS recovery, instant recovery of databases. If you've been with Veeam for a while, you'll know that network attached storage, and SMB shares have been a challenge because they exist somewhere else, and they just get presented as a volume to a user, to a server, to something, right? There's nothing that specifically sits as part of a backup file, and just based on the way that the protocol works. Instant recovery of databases is kind of the same thing. You could have a whole bunch of databases on one server. How do you recover just one? Jonah, what are some neat things about both of these? And I know that we've got some notes here about like data mining or other uses. Can you tell us what you see around this, and maybe what some features that are coming would be, to beef these up a bit?
Right, so as it is now, it functions kind of like instant recovery for VMs, except in these cases it brings up only the share or only the database. It allows reading and writing to them, and then when you migrate them back to production, it of course sends the original data back, plus at the very end the changes that you've written.
Okay.
These have been used in several Veeam blog posts and demos for data mining to reduce strain on your production network, and unfortunately are on-premises only at this time, partly because NAS Backup does not have Cloud Connect support yet. I imagine in the future it would be expanded to include service providers and Cloud Connect.
Nice, but it's still pretty cool to have even on premises, because you want to speed it, spin it up and have quick access to it. It's a nice feature to have there for sure. Next slide, Trista. All right, this is one of my favorites. I don't know about you guys. Instant recovery of anything to HyperV. Like you can see here, it gives expanded recovery options. You can take anything in your environment, restore it to the Veeam or HyperV now. It's great for Nutanix AHV recovery. Gives you some cost-effective repository options. So Jonah, why don't you explain like how this works, how it's going to benefit users, and what Global Data Vault tends to do with it?
So this is kind of building on Veeam 10 functionality, wherein they did an instant recovery of anything to VMware. Now they've gone and done the reverse and gone anything to HyperV. So this means you can spin up vCenter VMs, Windows Linux agents, AWS machines, Azure machines, Nutanix machines. And so what this enables is, first off, slightly cheaper hardware. Say I have a VMware vCenter as my main production environment, but I need to instant recover. Previously, you would have had to have a second vCenter on premises for DR. Now you can just put in a physical box with Veeam and the HyperV role enabled on it, so you only have the cost of Windows Server licensing instead of that and VMware. Or if you were wanting to migrate off of agents or VMware or even AWS or Azure, to an on-premises Hyper-V. It means you could instant recover everything in and then migrate it into production instead of going through the normal disk conversions.
Nice. So if businesses, and we know that hypervisor preferences change with budget cycles, or as like Microsoft or VMware release new features that might appeal more to different businesses. So this tool actually would give companies the ability to migrate between hypervisors, or maybe even just certain applications to take care of different needs, right? And do that without any third-party tools. I mean, Veeam's a third-party tool, right? But they wouldn't have to have anything else. And it's just running from the backups that they're already taking. So,
and it would minimize downtime during those migrations.
Right. And then you can always, again, do your physical to virtual, like you mentioned. That was always a big thing for me way back in the day. Was, I don't know if you've ever used VMware Converter, but it was a process and took a long time. And you kind of crossed your fingers and hoped it completed successfully. And with this, basically, you just right click on it and say instant recovery, and you're done, right? So that's awesome. All right, Richard, we'll get to your question here in just a minute. You see that. Backup engine enhancements. Obviously, I mentioned, Veeam is innovative. They've led the space in speed of backups. If you've ever watched maybe before you switch to Veeam and after you switch to Veeam, how fast things work, and then as you add jobs into Veeam or grow your environment, just how quickly the engines work, how quickly the data is processed. We have a lot of new features here, and these are just a couple that we wanted to talk on. So, Jonah, can you run us through this list and sort of why it's important and what they mean for not only customers, but maybe Global Data Vault on the processing side?
Right. So caching improvements and the advanced I/O optimization theoretically means you could see smaller backups because Veeam will see less changes that it needs to write during an incremental backup. The block-aligned writes are really interesting because it means that it will reduce fragmentation on your disks, and therefore you'll see less random I/O reading and writing, which means theoretically faster backups and instant recoveries. And then there's a lot of other enhancements. Most of it is actually been ported from instant recovery enhancements that were made in Veeam 10, and now it applies to the other restores and even regular backups. So for example, of course, as the slides say, they made their RAM interactions more efficient and they changed their compression algorithms. At GDV, one of our favorite new features is actually the second to last bullet, the NUMA enhancements. So previously, if you were using a backup proxy for VMware or Hyper-V, the Veeam recommendation was to only use a single CPU machine because there was actually a slowdown with multi-core, multi-CPU machines. But now, Veeam has NUMA-aware enhancements, which means that it's actually faster to use a multi-CPU machine than a single CPU machine.
And you tested that out in your lab, right?
Right. Across all of these enhancements in the lab, I was seeing about 2 to 3 times faster performance. Veeam in their posts were saying in some cases they were even seeing 5 to 10 times faster performance. And a lot of this was actually built in conjunction with HP. Veeam was given a lot of hardware to test on, and in their tests on the HP hardware, they were actually able to hit almost 12 gigabytes per second processing on their backups, and that is capital B.
Wow, that's huge. I think the fastest I've ever seen, back in the day was like a 3 gigabyte maybe, and some of that's disk limitations, right? So that's special sauce there. What's a resource scheduler improvements, and what does that mean?
So resource scheduler improvements is there's now a checkbox when you go to configure a backup or replication job that allows you to say it's a high priority job. So previously Veeam had this entire matrix of job priorities where it went replication, regular backup, backup copy. But now if you wanted specific jobs to kick off first and you had all your jobs scheduled at the same time, you could specify those specific jobs as high priority jobs, and they would run before the other jobs.
So like if you had higher applications. Yeah, so if you had higher importance or things that you wanted to make sure that you had a little bit lower RPO or something like that on, you could always make sure that they went first on that job, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Cool. And then maybe even get backed up before they replicated or, something like that. Next slide, please. All right. So why Veeam and Global Data Vault? I don't see Will back on, so we'll just run through this real quickly. Veeam software obviously has been in the Magic Quadrant for a long time. The Gartner Magic Quadrant, if you don't know, they have the 4 quadrant. Well, it's obviously a quadrant, but there's niche and visionaries, and Veeam actually skipped the niche, which is where most people enter, most companies enter, and they went straight to visionaries. At the time, they were the only software-only, virtual-only company to do so. And they've since gone up and to the right up into, the leaders quadrant. And are now, one of the biggest cloud data management companies out there and best, right? That's why we choose them, why we decide to utilize Veeam for ourselves, for our customers. We're a Veeam only platinum cloud service provider, so that's the highest level that you can get with Veeam. Again, that's all we do, right? So we have a lot of Veeam experts. I can't tell you enough, like Jonah is one of the best out there, and everybody that works at Global Data Vault is just like him, maybe not as young and not a Veeam Vanguard, but they are all experts, and they will all be there to help you. So again, we have 2 Veeam certified engineers, 4 Veeam certified engineers, 2 Veeam certified architects, and 1 Veeam Vanguard, who is Mr. Jonah May. Jonah, if somebody calls and they need help, or if as new customers, would they by chance get to talk to you on the phone? Could they bounce this off of you any time of the day?
There is a chance, yes. I still work implementation projects, and in the mornings I tend to be the level 2 backup on our service desk, though I'll still field some questions in the afternoon.
Nice. So we're going to include, Jonah's LinkedIn we have on our blog site. He's also on Twitter, whatnot, so make sure to check him out. And Trista, I think we're ready for questions.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to circle back and get Richard's question first. So he posted in chat, does instant recovery of a VM backup to HyperV host still require to pre-allocate the entire disk storage that VM used in production? There are other vendors that use differencing VHDX disk to be able to use dynamic disk in the instant recovery and not take up more space than necessary in your backup appliance. I think that's a question for Jonah.
All right. My understanding of that is, Brian, I think you're echoing.
Yeah, Brian, you got it.
My understanding with that is there have been no changes to the underlying technology. As it worked before, if the HyperV VM was of a fixed size, you would need to pre-allocate. You would only see it expand if it was dynamically expanding. Based off what we saw in Veeam 10, my guess would be anything that you instant recover that's not HyperV will be a fixed disk, just because what we saw with any hypervisor into VMware was, regardless of settings on the previous hypervisor, Veeam was bringing them in as thick provisioned disks. That way we could take advantage of the faster transport modes that they offer during migrations.
Cool. Okay. I have a few other questions that we've gotten both online and offline. And so I did ask Brian to join us as well. Again, Brian's director of sales. So, but this next one is for Jonah again. As a GDV and Veeam customer, could you give a brief summary on how version 11 is going to affect my backup environment?
So there are some underlying changes to backup copy job logic that we're still investigating and working with Veeam to demo and figure out. It sounds like backup copy jobs will now use forward incremental logic instead of forever forward incremental logic, which means you'll have your GFS points created immediately, but you have to check how your job is configured, or else you could potentially add incrementals to your repository and chain. Beyond that, most of the enhancements you're going to see are the processing and under the hood changes that that you saw earlier that we talked about, where essentially if you weren't already hitting disk I/O limitations as your bottleneck, you may see faster processing of your backup jobs and replication jobs.
Okay, great. This next question is directed at both Brian and Jonah. So is upgrading to version 11 free? And what is the version path needed to version 11? What if I'm on an older version of Veeam?
Good question. So as long as you're on version 9.5 update 4, and Jonah can correct me on this, there's different levels. I think it's at number 28, whatever that number is. But essentially version 9.5 update 4 and beyond, there's no additional cost to get it upgraded to version 11. And there's no impact on your current backup jobs at that current version. If you're on an older version, then yes, there will be some backup work that needs to take place.
Right, kind of like Brian said. There, of course, was the licensing change between 9.5 and 10 that Veeam introduced to the universal license. But as long as you are running 9.5 update 4B or higher, which is build number 9542866, you can go straight to Veeam 11. Beyond that, you need to upgrade to at least 9.54B or some version of 10 in order to go to 11.
And those backups are all in place, right? Because the history of Veeam, as far as I know, they've never had a rip and replace upgrade. It's just all been in place. Is that still the case?
Yeah. You may have to do multiple in-place upgrades to get up to the latest release. And you'll actually want to make sure you're on 9.5 update 4B or higher if you're using Cloud Connect, because once your service provider upgrades to Veeam 11, anything below that 9.5 update 4B build will break. Because Veeam has EOL'd all releases below that.
Okay, here's another one for Jonah. How are these new features going to help in the case of a disaster and a full failover if the cloud is needed?
Well, of course, if you have CDP, you're going to see lower RPOs with around the same spin-up times as replication, where it should just be a 1 or 2 click power on and failover. What you should see is instant recoveries. Theoretically, with the NUMA enhancements, should have faster vMotions if you're using vCenter, where you're migrating out of the backup chain back into your production VMDKs. I believe HyperV should also see those same enhancements.
Okay, I have a couple more in chat from Nick. Does Veeam deploy the Immutable Backup repo, or would we have to deploy a Linux box for it?
You would have to deploy a Linux box and I believe set it up with a single access token that you would then add it as a backup repository using that single access token.
And you and Veeam recommend XFS because of their zero block cloning technology, right?
Right. XFS is essentially REFS for Linux, so it is recommended.
Okay, and another one from chat. Can you all speak about whether virtual offsite spin-up of regular offsite backups, not replication, is possible with GDB, and what is a typical turnaround time for server, assuming 500 to a terabyte file server?
So I'm assuming the question is offsite spin up, maybe in the case of a disaster, or if you need that, or because we do testing to make sure that everything that we have in the environment, okay, for DR, cool. We do testing, so quarterly we'll turn everything, the whole network, do a full DR test for you. The Veeam Sure Backup feature does have the ability to do that type of spin up testing. Jonah, what do you have about, instant Veeam recovery or turning these things on?
Right, so on our side, non-replication, like Kelly talked about, we do instant recovery. There's the quarterly test option where when we spin everything up, we tell you, if something failed to power on. There's also an annual test in there wherein we actually give you VPN access and let you go in and test everything. Of course, you are going to see longer spin-up times for that. I believe our SLA for that is 4 hours just because we have to build the networking, we have to deploy the VPN server, we have to hand it off to you, not to mention instant recoveries take longer to mount and power on than a replication machine. The other downside you're going to see with that, while it does work, is you will see slightly performance at spin-up time just because of how instant recovery works. We're going to be running those machines out of the backup chain on the cloud host at that point. Replication is actually a replica VM. All we have to do is consolidate some snapshots, and it's essentially the same as your production system. Versus instant recovery, we have to wait for everything to migrate out of the backup chain back into a VMDK or VHDX.
So from a turnaround time, regardless if you're doing instant VM recovery or like a DR power on, it still is about the same time as however long it takes to boot. I mean, it takes a few seconds for the backup file to mount for an instant VM recovery, right? But it's still, the size of the server doesn't matter, if I remember. Is that correct?
Correct. The only difference you're going to see with size of the server mattering is how long it takes to migrate back into the VMDKs and VHDXs.
Yeah, so for like a full recovery, but if you just wanted to test it, make sure everything's work, it's going to be up and running pretty quickly. You see everything you need, you can validate it, and then you just turn it back off. And that's, you know, however long you need to validate your stuff, basically. Does that answer your question, Richard?
Yes. How do you all handle failback to on-premise?
So replication, there is actually built-in failback functionality that we use. In a DR scenario, what we would do is we would actually get your Veeam server backup on your side, get your production hypervisor backup, and then we'd actually temporarily install our Cloud Connect license on your Veeam server and initiate what we call a reverse seed load, where essentially we act as your production network in the spin up, you act as the cloud provider, and we send you the backups. Then we reinstall your Veeam license and instant recover on your side.
What if it's like you need to do 100 terabytes? You know, I'm just throwing out a number. You guys have, or GDV, we have an appliance that we can send to customers, or disk storage of some sort, right? And how does that work?
We do have a seed server if needed, where we basically write a backup copy job to it, ship it out to you, and then you can map your Veeam server to those backups. We just much prefer, where possible, to use the reverse seed load, of course, just because it's a little simpler to set up, and it tends, in most cases, to be faster than sending everything onto the server, shipping the server to you, and offloading it. Of course, in a case where it's like 100 terabytes, that's probably faster than sending it all over the internet.
Yeah, and maybe they need, you know, a couple of terabytes worth of virtual machines up and running immediately, and the rest can go, you know, a few days later or whatever via a hard drive. It's pretty flexible.
Right.
Okay, another question for Jonah. If I have Netapp file shares, how can I recover those? Will NAS Instant Recovery help with this?
Good question.
So, yes, locally, that will help you. Since there is no Cloud Connect support right now, our recommendation is to actually add that Netapp as a drive to another machine and back up the entire VM. That way, if you needed to fail over to the cloud, you could instant recover on our side and still have access to that file share.
So that's a workaround for the non-cloud connect, is to do that.
Correct.
But on premises, they could just simply do that instant NAS recovery and mount it and then track the changes, right? Just the same way?
Right. You do have to take licensing into account, though, too, because I believe for that functionality, it's like one license per 250 gigabytes. I'm sure Brian can correct me on that if I'm off on the number.
I think that's what I saw too.
Yeah.
When is Global Data Vault planning on upgrading to version 11?
We are currently demoing it. We tend to wait, of course, to make sure there's no major issues with the release before we upgrade, but we're having to do some additional testing and work with Veeam because of that new copy job logic I mentioned earlier in the call. We need to see essentially how it impacts our storage and our environment with Veeam changing from forever forward to forward incremental.
Okay, so that's a stay tuned.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. how do you back up endpoints? Could you back up through backup for Office 365, or is there a better strategy?
So on premises, you can use Veeam Agent for Windows or Linux or even Mac OS, though Mac OS is more a supplement to Time Machine and existing Apple backup software. Off premises, if you can potentially get Veeam Agent working through the VPN, but our recommendation is to use Veeam Backup for Office 365 and just have your employees write all their data to OneDrive, Outlook, etc.
Okay. Jonah, is CDP effective in a vCSP cloud? If not, what's the best RTO, RPO timeframe I can expect from Global Data Vault?
So it is not supported at this time by Veeam for Cloud Connect, which means our next best option is replication, which is a 1 hour RPO offsite at best.
Does Global Data Vault have a way to back up Dynamics 365?
Good question. Let's see if
It's
that's
not,
supported.
from a Veeam standpoint, it's not a currently supported, Office 365 component, which they have Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams. That's not to say that we can't do it, and that's what Jonah's looking at. But from a Veeam perspective, it's not part of their Office 365 backup today.
Right. Yeah,
Okay,
it looks like there is a 2017 blog post on doing a backup for it. It looks like it's actually backing up the machine itself, though.
With Dynamics, can you back up the actual servers running it?
Yes, it looks like if you're running Dynamics on-prem, you can add the virtual machines that run Dynamics and back those up.
Okay, last question I have. What type of advantages do I have backing up to Global Data Vault versus AWS or Azure? And maybe a follow-up to that is, can I back up servers to Global Data Vault from AWS or Azure?
Right. So yes, you can back up from AWS and Azure to Global Data Vault. The advantage you're going to see with Global Data Vault is, of course, you've got a little bit of redundancy in that if you have an AWS or Azure outage, like we've seen several times in the last few years, we don't run on that hardware, so we're unaffected. Additionally, you have our support techs who will work with you 24/7 in an emergency. And I imagine that it takes quite a bit longer to engage AWS or Azure support than it would our support. I'm unfortunately not familiar enough with their support to know what their response times are. But in an emergency, we tend to respond within an hour.
I'll give you a little bit of more info on that. Yeah, when the outages occur, in the public clouds, you're going to struggle to find, get in line, and you can find a line to get into. Where with Global Data Vault, we're 24/7, 365 shop in the event of a disaster. So that is one of the biggest benefits by partnering with Global Data Vault compared to the public cloud.
Yeah, and to that point, like even if you have a question about your Veeam backup job, let's say something fails on a backup job on your on-premises backup, people can actually call Global Data Vault and be like, "What's this error? What does it mean? What's going on?" And the GDV engineers will take care of everything, and they won't point fingers, or they'll just go figure it out for you, right? And I'm sure Brian and Jonah, you guys have seen this time and again where maybe it led to a bigger issue, maybe it was something simple, but there's nothing that Global Data Vault won't handle, from a support question perspective. You may not get that from other cloud providers.
Yeah, good point, Kelly. Our business slogan has always been, it's always our problem. It's not always our fault. And like Kelly said, our engineers are going to try to diagnose and troubleshoot the problem and point you in the right direction. Even if it doesn't have anything to do, with Global Data Vault, we want to at least get you in the right direction to get that problem solved. So we're always there to help.
Right, so that's what we do. You know, that's part of the white glove service here, fully managed cloud provider. You know, we've talked about backup as a service, DR as a service, and Office 365 backup. We talked about VMware Hyper-V and Acropolis, which is the Nutanix hypervisor. Now we can recover any of those things to Hyper-V or to VMware. We do physical endpoints, physical servers, etc. Jonah mentioned, you know, Windows, Linux, Mac OS if you choose to do so. But it's really about the service. You know, other places you may not know what you're going to get with Global Data Vault. You get everything, and we'll never leave you hanging. Anything else to add to that, Brian?
No, that's, yeah, you covered that.
Cool. Tristan?
Okay, well, great, everybody. Thanks so much for your time. If you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to send them to sales@globaldatavault.com, and we'll make sure we answer them for you. And be sure and watch our web space at globaldatavault.com/webinars, where we host a different webinar every month, and we'd love for you to join us. So that concludes. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.